well, hello and welcome to the OnStage Colorado podcast. I'm Alex Miller, and with me once again is arts reporter Toni Tresca, and also we have a special guest today, our new correspondent, Alice Kaderlan. Hello to you both.
Hi, guys.
Good morning. It's great to be with you both here.
Yeah. So, we've got three of us on here today for a reason, but we'll get to that in a sec. So we're recording on Saturday, March 9th. And as usual, we'll review some of the latest shows we've seen or reviewed, as well as take a look at what's coming up around all the stages in Colorado that we're tracking. So, and also later in the podcast, we have an interview with Deborah Jordy. And Toni, you did that one. Can you tell us who Deborah Jordy is?
Absolutely. So Deborah is the executive director of the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, which is a district that funds seven different counties in Colorado and supports their arts programming. And so we just have a really insightful conversation about kind of how the structure of that works, the history of the organization, how funding works, and then also we kind of have a speculative conversation about how best to diversify funding to ensure that funds are more equitably spread across tier 1, 2, and 3 organizations. So she was really game to talk. So yeah, it's a really fun conversation.
A super important organization for theater and other performing arts in the metro area. So before we get to our main topic, I wanted to touch on, so there's the Hairspray. It was touring Broadway production coming through the Buell at the Denver Center this week, and it got rained out.
It did.
Toni, how do you get a show rained out that's an inside show in the middle of winter?
It's fairly hard to do, but they did manage to do it via sprinkler system. So although the motto of the show is "You can't stop the beat," sprinklers sure as heck can stop that beat, and they did for 2 nights in a row. They ended up having to cancel performances on their opening night on Tuesday as well as Wednesday in order to clean this information up. And it was really interesting to hear about. I've never received an email before from an organization alerting me that my ticket has been canceled due to sprinkler system going off. So I can definitely count that as first.
Yeah, and it said something like a worker bumped into a pipe. It's like, what? It seems like they need more than that to go off, but I don't know. I'm sure there's more to the story, but it doesn't matter. But anyway, the show did in fact go back on was it Thursday night that it started up? So they lost 2 nights.
That's right.
And did you ever get to go see it, Toni?
I didn't. I was supposed to go on Tuesday. Tuesday was the only night that I would have been able to see it. But because of the sprinkler system, I ended up having to miss Hairspray. So
yeah. My only hope was that somehow this would result in them replacing some of the seating and that the main curtain in the Buell Theater looks really grungy. I don't know if you ever noticed that. It looks like I'm sure they would love to go in there and redo that whole theater, but of course that's a huge project compared to the ones that they did in the Bonfils complex. So anyway, well, best of luck to the folks on Hair and the cast and crew to get through this, and hopefully they won't have anything going on at their next location. So we wanted to talk a little bit about theater criticism this week and how it's vanished from a lot of places, and it's part of it is it's very related to the ongoing erosion of the news industry, where just newspapers just don't have the staffs that they used to, and as someone who was in the newspaper industry back in the 90s when Craigslist came along and the internet and all that just started eroding it. I'm intimately familiar with how that all happened, and of course, a lot of times, just like almost any organization, it seems like the first cuts go towards the arts, or the humanities. It's like papers started losing their specific editors. They might have had a music editor, or a theater writer, and now a lot of papers barely even have an A&E reporter anymore. It's just like a general assignment reporter that maybe bumble through, and a lot of from what I've noticed, many papers don't even bother trying to go cover theater. So Alice, you came out of this world in a big way. So you were writing for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer back in the heyday when they had theater writers, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. And even before that, in DC, some regional papers, I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah. So, for our part, one of the reasons I started OnStage Colorado like 5 years ago was for this very reason, was I thought I saw a, kind of a vacuum. And originally I thought I would just be doing it myself. And then as things kind of moved along, I started, adding other reviewers that were interested in contributing, and some have come and gone, but I've had some mainstays like Toni here and a few others. And now it's great to have you on here, Alice, since you have such a deep experience. But first I wanted to ask Toni, so you write a lot for Westword and the Boulder Weekly, and it seems like they're mostly interested in previews versus reviews. And how would you explain that preference?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've quite literally had my editors tell me that nobody wants to read reviews, which I don't 100% agree with. And I would also argue that, that has been changing a little bit. So I've recently been assigned some reviews for Westword and Boulder Weekly, and those have been some of my most read pieces. So I think that there is actually a vacuum there for reviews in the market, because people like to be, I think people like to be told not only what's going on, but the truth about what thing actually is as well. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah. You could go on Amazon and look for like a paint scraper, and there's 7,000 reviews about this one paint scraper. But I was just looking at like one of the most looked at reviews on our site was a jukebox for the Algonquin at Miners Alley, and I can see that it's had 475 views since I posted it on. I'm trying to look at my other screen here, March 5th. And it's typical for most of our reviews to have several hundred, and some it's rare that they get quite that high, but it's definitely a demand for it out there. So,
Alex, can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so, I've been doing this for so long and I have written over the years many, many previews and many, many reviews, dance as well as theater, which is what I'm doing for you guys. But there is no question, even when we moved to online with clicks, where you really could tell who was reading what, my reviews always got more reads, more clicks than the previews, because people want to go to see stuff. And they want some guidance on what to go see. Especially, if you go to the big stuff, it costs a lot of money to go see a show, even the smaller things, if you need, babysitter or transportation or whatever. And so it's the reviews, as I say, and not just in my experience, but with the arts organizations that I've covered over the years. They love the reviews, and they take the reviews, and then they post the reviews, or they send out the reviews by whatever means they have. And that's what helps them get people in. I think they like, Toni, previews because they think that those will bring people in advance. They'll do advance ticket sales. And frankly, I don't know. I don't think they have any way of knowing that, whether they do or not. But I think that's the reason that a lot of arts organizations do want previews. But the problem with previews, and Toni, I don't know, and Alex, if this has been your experience, but there have been many times where I have oversold a show. You do an interview with an artist or performers, and it sounds great. And you can even read, reviews of the same show in other places. And then for whatever reason, the actual production locally is simply not up to snuff. And
that's so true.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that's a really great point, Alice, is like that when you don't have the review, you don't have any chance to go back and like make sure to correct the record, to be like, okay, actually, wait, folks, maybe this one is not exactly worth your time. Whereas I think the reviews do provide that valuable service, particularly as Colorado is not, we talk about this all the time on the podcast. We're not exactly lacking for theater in this moment. There is a plethora of great offerings all across the state. And so if there's no way to sort through all of that, how does one as a consumer even begin to unpack anything? I understand people who tell me that they only go to the Denver Center or one other theater because they're just like, it's just easiest to just go to one or two. And I'm like, well, but there's so much more than that.
Absolutely.
And that's what reviews are helpful for. But
Yeah. And that's part of the reason that, that OnStage Colorado is trying to, get more and more reviewers to get out into even some of the smaller theaters, because for most people are not seeing Broadway shows. They're not in New York or London or even seeing or being able to afford the touring shows that come through. There's a lot of people's first experience with theaters, with their local community theater. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the value of reviews and being honest about them. And so there is kind of a tendency.
Well,
Alice?
what I was going to say just before we move on to that, there's one other purpose that a review serves, or at least the way I think about my reviews, is that it can be helpful to the artist. I mean, my first concern is the public, who's going to go to see the actual show. But I do, depending upon the particular production, I do try to offer some comments in a nice way. I mean, I never do nasty reviews, but in a nice way that may actually provide some guidance, either for that production or for future work that a particular playwright may do, that an actor may do, that a dancer or choreographer may do. So, if you don't have reviews, there's no way for them to get feedback except through what the particular audience reacts to. And that's not, very specific. I mean, basically, really what that tells them is, yeah, we liked it, or no, we didn't like it.
Right. Yeah. And it's also a disservice for, to be just doing rah-rah reviews for everything. If you're trying just to be too nice, and you're reviewing a show that really kind of wasn't that great, you're doing a disservice not just to the audience that might be buying tickets to this, but also to the actors and the people putting that show on, thinking, "Wow, we're awesome." It's like, maybe you weren't, and they need to know that. And it's like, there's a lot. They have a lot of competition. So even if it's the smallest theater, you're competing with, the Avalanche game and whatever's on streaming on Netflix and other theaters. So even if you're, there's no excuse saying like, oh, well, just a community theater. It's like, well, any little theater is perfectly capable, of finding people to put on a great show. And sometimes it's definitely more challenging when you're not paying people, a decent, amount of money, or you have a casting director, things like that. But, you got to keep your game up to stay viable.
And I have to tell you, both in Denver as well as in the other cities where I've reviewed, I mean, some of the best shows I have seen are surprises. They're either, small theaters, or they are shows that maybe, are not the popular ones, the ones that have been produced elsewhere. I mean, you never know what's going to be good. I mean, it really is, kind of a crapshoot when you go to the theater. You just don't know. And that's where reviews can also be extremely helpful, especially in a community like ours where we have a huge amount of theater across our state, and a huge amount of really good theater.
Yeah. And sometimes the language that's the theater might have on their website doesn't tell the story. It's 2 paragraphs, and it just doesn't get to all those nuances. Toni, I think one show that comes to mind that we both were kind of blown away by last year was Theater Arterbus's piece, where it was really hard to describe without, a decent amount of verbiage and photos to explain what it was. And it was so good. And it was like, people wouldn't have known what the heck that was without reading a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I was about to just add that. I think that's a really good point too, is I think also a lot of times if you're only doing previews or only relying on that, you're really just, a lot of times you're relying on the stuff that has the most sexy PR, which isn't always necessarily the best theater. Those are 2 different categories. And I think that you just mentioning the pasticciary over at Theater Artebus is a fantastic example of that. I had a really, really hard time pitching that for preview coverage because it's a weird show.
Yeah.
It's a very strange show. It has not been done anywhere else. It's a world premiere. It's got a lot of mime and physical theater elements to it. But I would hands down say it was one of the best productions I've seen in my entire life, but it was very difficult to try to get that covered in any fashion outside of a review. So,
yeah. Speaking of which, Theater Autobus does have a new show coming up called The Bluebird. It starts March 22nd. So it's based on what we saw in previous shows. I would definitely try and get out to see that one. But any other thoughts on one of the things that I would say is that when I moved down here from Summit County, I guess in 2012, I kind of missed my community that I was part of there. And since then, the theater community in the sort of Denver, Boulder area has become part of my community. And so it does make it sometimes difficult when you get to be familiar with, the director's creative team, whatever, to, write something that they're probably not going to like. And then, you see them the next time. But that's just something, they're adults, they, for the most part, I never get any blowback on that. I've had maybe a little bit of silent treatment here and there once in a while. But is that something you've run into, Alice, or how do you deal with that?
See, Alex, I've actually approached things a little differently. Sometimes, especially in Seattle, I was in Seattle for 20 years and got very, very close to, actually more the dance theater community rather than theater, although I did a lot of theater. I did not socialize, in large part, there were exceptions, with the people that I was covering, with the stuff that I was reviewing, because I didn't want to run into exactly that problem.
Right.
And of course, I've been a hard news reporter as well in DC and lots of other places. And I've always felt as though our role as the media is to really replace the audience when we write what we write. And so that distance, I think, for me in my career, I think has been very useful. Now, as I say, you have to get to know the companies. You have to get to know the people, because you do want to understand sort of what they're all about. But I think it's a fine line. And for me, I've just tended to write honest reviews, nice reviews. As I say, I've never been nasty, although there was one time in Seattle when somebody actually did interpret something I said, a choreographer, and she didn't like it. And nowadays, in the world of social media, it can really get ugly if somebody doesn't like what you've written. And actually, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer had to pull down the comments from that particular review when they posted it online. But, that's just life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If you put something out in public sphere, you've got to anticipate, you've got to be ready to, hear back, whether you're the theater or the media or whatever. One of the things I've been a little disappointed about on our site is that, we've got a pretty good commenting function. I don't hear that many comments from folks. I'm not sure why that is. People just, they're usually, just favorable.
Well, and actually that's interesting because in my experience, a lot of the writing that I've done in recent years has been either online exclusively or as an adjunct to hard copy. And the comments have been mostly negative. I've gotten very few positive comments, but when I know that the reviews are positive, because when I run into people, these sort of normal people, average people, I get a lot of feedback face to face. But, I think people like to write negative stuff everywhere, especially these days.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking more along the lines, the comments we do get are like, yes, that was a great show. And, whatever, that kind of thing. So,
well, that's great. Yeah. That's great when they do that.
One other thing I wanted to touch on is just from the point of view of writing. So, Alice, you and I have been at it a pretty long time. Toni is a little newer to the game, but, I've written all kinds of stuff over my writing career. And I find theater writing or, writing a good critique is probably one of the more difficult pieces of writing because, you'd love to write 3,000 words about, especially if it's a really great show, but you can't hit on everything that you thought was great or not so great. And it's a challenge, especially, when I bring on newer reviewers and they just want to summarize the plot. It's like, and so I have a style guide that I'm preparing, that gives some information about like, here's what your review should be. It should be, you want to talk a little about the plot, especially if it's a newer play that people may not be familiar with. But that's not what, and it's harder to like go in and talk about the specifics of how the director did this or that, or how someone realized a character. And Alice, I want to ask you, like, when you approach a review, like, what's your thought process?
Well, I have to tell you, and this may sound a little arrogant, but I do consider, particularly my reviews, but even my previews when I've done them, or feature stories, I regard them, I hope that people learn. I hope people learn something about the particular art form, as I say, because I do theater as well as dance. But that they learn about the craft that it takes to produce, a particular production. So I'm starting from the standpoint of, if I know nothing about this, because actually sometimes I don't read very much about a production. I will often go into it cold, because I have found that my expectations, and I think this is true for a lot of people, my expectations invariably affect how I react to the production. So,
Right.
so I try to go in pretty cold. Sometimes it's impossible, especially if it's something like Message in a Bottle, for instance, which, I just saw. And I try to put myself in the seat of an audience person who likes the form that I'm reviewing. I mean, I'm not assuming that I'm somebody off the street who's never seen a play before, but how are they going to react? What is going to affect them or not? And fundamentally, I want to be moved. I want to be emotionally touched by productions. And so when I look back, whether it's a dance show or it's a play, I want to come out feeling as though I've had an experience that is meaningful. And that typically is what guides my reaction. And it's really interesting, because over the course of my career, there have been times when I had to write literally when I walk out of the theater.
Right.
When I was in Pittsburgh, I had a deadline of midnight, and that was crazy. But what I really prefer is at least having overnight, because I often find that my immediate reaction can alter some if I have a little bit of time to absorb. And I think that's true for the way people watch.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I've definitely had a lot of experience where I walk out of the play and I'm like, I have absolutely no idea what to say about that or how to write about that. But I always do write something about it, and it really helps to have a night's sleep and come at it fresh. And then you start, as you write, you start exploring it more, and you find those nuances to write about. So,
if I can add something, I learned when I started out as a hard news reporter before I started doing art stuff. And what I found was that I needed to just think back on, what did I remember? Okay. And what I remembered was going to be the focus of what I wrote. And often it would be the first thing. It would be the lead.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty much what I think that's a really fascinating strategy, Alice. I really do relate to that a lot in terms of how I kind of write reviews as well. Is like, I also oftentimes am operating on kind of hard deadlines like that. Not midnight. That's quite a crazy.
Oh, it was crazy. Yeah, I used to have to take the computer to the show. It was crazy, and feed from the theater. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
I mean, much respect to you. Kudos to you and your editors for doing that.
Yeah.
But I got to agree. I most of the time I kind of just will start, and I will just like take 20 minutes, and I will just like info dump essentially the big points that resonated with me. I don't really look back at my notes during that point yet, because I do take notes while I'm watching the performances when I'm going to review. Do you take notes as well, Alice?
That's a great
question.
question. I was going to ask about that.
You know what? I honestly don't take notes much, but keep in mind, I've been doing this for 40 years. Okay. And actually it's interesting, because I even did a little bit of it when I was in college, never imagining that I was going to professionally work as a writer or as a critic. I was going in a whole different direction. So now I always have a pen and I, am at the ready. If there's something, for instance, last night I went to the ballet to see Coppelia, and I did want to make sure that I was capturing the dancers who were really standing out for me. So yeah, I did make a few notes, and certainly when I went to see the most recent production of Wonderbound, which was fabulous, sold out the whole run in advance. Yeah, I did. That one was one because there was an awful lot going on, and I wanted to capture it. And not everything that and Toni, I'm guessing this is true for you. Not everything that I put down, in notes, or Alex, winds up in the review. But it's a good way. It's a good way to remember it.
Yeah,
I totally agree. Most of the time, I thought most of the stuff that I'm writing down in a dark theater when I can't see my pad is not going to be published. But it's good to be able to look back on, to be able to refer to and remind you. I'll sometimes jot down if I'm like, oh, here's a good line or something that I maybe could say, or like here is a piece of dialogue that resonated with me. I'm like, I'll maybe jot that down. But yeah, I think that's really interesting to hear.
There's one other thing that we've lost by not having many reviews and many arts writers anymore, and that is that I actually learned to be a critic by reading other reviews of the same shows that I was going to. So I learn, and sometimes I will, change or at least understand something that, I missed. So that's when, in just our community of arts writers, we've really lost a lot of that.
I agree. That's a really great point, Alice. I using you as an example here, I really enjoyed your recent review of Wonderbound show. That show was a little bit difficult for me. I think I kind of walked away a little bit kind of hazy on it. I was a little bit unsure after watching it, but then I read your review, and it actually kind of reframed the experience for me. And you reading your review, Lisa Kennedy is another one. She's over at the Denver Post. I always feel like I learn something anytime I read her reviews. And then Alex, you and Eric, every time all of your reviews on the site as well. I think it is so valuable to be able to read other perspective, because it just, I try not to read them before I write my reviews, but after the fact, it really does.
I do that as well. I'll
no, go ahead.
If I write a review, or especially ones where like I didn't really like it, I'm like, am I missing something here? So after I write it, I might, after I post it, I might go and look and see what others have said about it. And sometimes I'm like, yes, I was right. and other times, I'll be like, yeah, I can see how, that was the thing. So, it's a tricky biz.
Well, I think the trickiest part of writing reviews is that obviously we have experience. But reviews are subjective, and our experience of a particular production is subjective. And I am always conscious of the fact that there could be other completely valid reactions. And so I've always had the view, and I've said it publicly, what I hope is that people get a sense of what my aesthetic is, so they know when I read her stuff, yeah, I'm likely to agree some, I'm likely to disagree, or I always agree with her, or nothing that she says has any value whatsoever for me.
All right. That's great. All right. Well, that's wonderful. I was glad we had a chance to have this conversation. And yeah, there are a couple of, like you mentioned, Lisa Kennedy, who's she's not at the Denver Post, but she writes for the Denver Post on a freelance basis.
Right.
I will say that John Wenzel, who's he's the A&E editor at the Denver Post. He's been there forever. Is a really thoughtful reviewer, and I wish he could do more. I just don't think he has the opportunity to get out as much. But he's great.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, look around the state at all the live theater coming up, and we'll get into some of, as we get into what some might call the Ides of March. So hold on, we'll be right back. OnStage Colorado is sponsored by the Town Hall Arts Center in Littleton, presenting Raisin from March 22nd through April 14th. A musical retelling of Lorraine Hansberry's classic A Raisin in the Sun, the soulful and inspiring musical is about a proud black family's quest for a better life in 1951 Chicago. It's a timeless story of family conflict, forgiveness, and the pursuit of the American dream. Tickets at townhallartscenter.org. OnStage Colorado is also sponsored by the Boulder Ensemble Theater Company, Betsy, with several upcoming shows, including the kids' improv show Mad Librarians, with shows in Denver and Boulder, as well as the Kingpenny Golden Radio Hour, also with shows in Denver and Boulder. Tickets at betsy.org. Support also comes from the Aurora Fox Arts Center, whose next show is Gem of the Ocean, opening March 23rd and running through April 14th. The play is the first in the Aurora Fox's commitment to produce August Wilson's 10-play The American Century Cycle. Boasting multiple Tony Awards and Pulitzer Prizes for drama, the cycle follows the lives of Black Americans throughout each decade of the 20th century. Tickets at aurorafoxartscenter.org. All right, welcome back to the OnStage Colorado podcast. It's time for our weekly whip around the state to see what's on stage and coming up soon. So on our site, we just had a review of 12 Angry Men at Funky Little Theater, which is a little unusual for them. They don't often do like real serious shows like that. So our reviewer April Took was at it. She said it was fantastic. So if you're in the Springs, check that out. The open house at Bob Blue is apparently I haven't seen that, but apparently our reviewer Carrie was kind of mystified by the weird comedy of it. I think she enjoyed it, but she was left scratching her head. So I think that's got another weekend there. So and then kind of I guess the big hit this week, at least for our reviewer Eric Fitzgerald, was Eleanor at Vintage Theater. So Deborah Persoff, who's a well-known name on stage in Colorado, is doing this one-woman show about Eleanor Roosevelt that runs through March 27th. It's on the little cabaret stage there at Vintage, and yeah, he called it a tour de force. So maybe you want to get out and see that one. And then, Alice, I want to ask you about Coppelia at Colorado Ballet. It's running through March 17th. Can you tell us a little bit of that? Because you just saw it.
I just saw it last night, so I haven't got my review written yet. But yeah, it's a real stunning production. It's interesting because I have been watching Colorado Ballet since I moved back to Denver in 2019, and they continue to get better and better. I mean, Gil Hodges, the artistic director, is really doing a great job, I think, of attracting and training new young dancers. Coppelia is a classic story ballet. So if you like story ballets and if you like traditional classical choreography, this is a wonderful production to see. The actual production, so the stage, the sets and the costumes, are from American Ballet Theater. So the visuals are absolutely beautiful. And, they change lead cast depending upon the production, but the cast that I saw last night, Leah McFadden was the lead ballerina, and she was gorgeous. Beautiful, beautiful technique. She has a real personality, and one of the things that I look for today when I review dance and ballet in particular is dancers who have personality, because dancers today are so well trained that it's hard to make a distinction anymore in their technique. I mean, sometimes you can, but I want to look for a dancer who really stands out, who comes out on stage and owns the stage. And she really does. Now, there's another dancer who will be dancing the same role, whom I also love. So I think it'll be great at any performance. The company looked fabulous. The corps de ballet, there's a lot of unison dancing, ensemble dancing in this thing, and they were together, and the orchestra sounded terrific. I mean, I'm not a great fan of story ballets typically. I like the more contemporary works, but this really was a fabulous production.
All right. Well, great. I'm glad we have you, since glad we have you here to talk about ballet, because I'm not sure I could be so articulate about it. But I get what you're saying. It's like, they're beyond being a dancer, they also have to be an actor. And I know when you saw Jekyll and Hyde, you talked a lot about that, because they actually had a fair amount of acting to do in addition to the dancing. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Also on stage now, or opening soon, is another ballet. Boulder Ballet is doing Mindfield, and you haven't seen this yet, right, Alice?
No, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it today. Okay. But that's very interesting. Of course, their style is very different. They don't do classical ballets, and not everything that they do is with point shoes. Of course, that's true of Colorado Ballet as well. Yeah, it's an interesting concept. That there hasn't been a lot of advanced information about it, but basically the idea. By the way, I have to say their dancers are fabulous. I love Boulder Ballet. They're a really, really good small company. And they do interesting things. And this one apparently has to do with the artistic director there wanted to deal with the issue of how ballet or dance can help with wellness. So I think he worked with some psychologists, and there are 3 choreographers. It's something very different. We're really lucky that we have both Boulder Ballet and Wonderbound, because they do a lot of really different, interesting, unusual stuff. It isn't just what we typically think of as dance. I mean, I would really almost call it, movement theater.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, Minefield, unfortunately, I think it's just one weekend. So
it is. Yeah, it's, I think they did a show last night and today 2 shows. And I'm not even sure if they do a show tomorrow. So yeah, with a small company like that, I mean, they just can't afford to do a lot of shows. Putting on a production is very expensive.
Yeah. So anyway, well, just with that in mind, think about the next time Boulder Ballet has a show coming up, since that one will be closed by the time you hear this. So on the other end of the spectrum, Shrek the Musical, the touring Broadway production, is coming through the Buell for a short run through March 14th through 17th. So a great one to take kids to. It is pretty good musical of the Shrek story. Modus Theater is doing transformative stories March 16th in Boulder, which I think is a story about trans folks, or has that topic to it. Down in Durango, another dance performance, Facets, with the 20 Moon Dancers at Stillwater Music from March 10th through the 17th. And then back to theater, Cost of Living is opening at Curious Theater in Denver, and it runs March 14th through 21st. Is that kind of a short run?
I think I think it should be April. I think it is running a full month, over a month over there, and because it's a pretty cool collaboration between Curious Theater Company and then Family Theater Company as well, who is because it's a story about 2 of the characters have disabilities, 2 of them do not, and so it's kind of this interesting story about the cost of living, as the title implies, and Curious is not. If anyone's been in that space, it's actually, there's some accessibility challenges in there. So they actually kind of reworked their space in order to be more accessible for these actors and do this collaboration. I think that Ben Rana, who is the Family Theater Company director, he gave a great quote. He was like, Curious Theater Company they're no longer letting perfect be the enemy of effort and trying. They're putting in the work here. And I thought that was a really powerful sentiment that he over there. And so Cost of Living is opening soon. Definitely get out there. It's a great script, Pulitzer Prize winning play. So it's going to be good.
All right. Well, that sounds awesome. And it's unusual that Curious is doing a collaboration like that. At least I can't think of one that they've done. So that's kind of cool. Maybe also,
I do believe it's the first time of something like this. So.
On the other end of the spectrum, perhaps, Nana's Naughty Knickers is at Longmont Theater from the 15th to the 24th of March. This is a comedy about a woman who's staying with her grandmother in the summer in New York, and she finds out that her grandmother is selling like lingerie, panties, and stuff like on the down low in the black market. I don't know what it is, but it sounds pretty silly. And then up in Evergreen, Ovation West is doing Wizard of Oz, March 15th through April 5th. And then we have a couple of productions of Noises Off. So that's a fantastic comedy. One's playing at the Magic Circle Players in Montrose, March 15th through 30th. And then, of course, at the Arvada Center, opening this March 22nd and running through May 5th. So, Alice, you're going to review that one, but I'm sure you've seen this one before. Can you tell people what Noises Off is all about?
Well, it's basically what happens backstage when there's a play. And I don't want to give away too much because it really is funny. And I have to say, the Arvada Center with this resident theater company that they have is really terrific. I mean, even when the play isn't great, they just do a wonderful show. I have seen A Little Night Music several times, and one of the best times I ever saw it was their production I mean, and they could do musicals. In fact, they did a Damn Yankees that was absolutely Broadway quality. I mean, it was fabulous from start to finish. So I always look forward to their shows. And I think that Noises Off is just a hoot.
Oh, it's so funny. And, as opposed to like the play that goes wrong, it's not just about, bad theater. It's about all these complicated relationships between the actors. And, there's one woman's running around in her underwear the whole time. And it's very silly, but it's very funny. And it's really, really a great show. If you haven't seen it, or even if you have, definitely go see that one.
This is my first time. I've never seen Noises Off. I've read the script many times, but this will be at the Arvada Center. I'll be there opening night, and that'll be my first. I'll get my Noises Off cherry popped.
All right. Well, Alice will have a review of that too.
Right.
Titanic the musical at CU, the College of Music is doing this, not the theater department, and that is runs March 15th through 17th in Mackey Auditorium, which is where I learned journalism as a young student there. That was the J School, but also a good creaky old auditorium that's fun to go see shows in. Local Lab is coming up, so this is local theater company's annual play festival, new play festival. So they have readings and events going on the weekend of March 15th through 17th. So if you want to hear some readings of and they spend a lot of time going through hundreds of scripts to pick them. So you can usually expect that they're pretty good material. Down in Manitou Springs, Iron Springs Chateau, which is kind of a dinner theater, does melodramas. They're doing one called Pirates of the Carabiner, or The Search for Booty. They always have some ridiculous title like that. So March 8th through all the way through August 3rd. So that's kind of their they always do big long runs. And then down south at the Durango Arts Center, they're doing Hand to God, which is about a comedy about religion and an evil puppet. Runs March 15th through 31st. And then the Ent Center in Colorado Springs is doing Cats, March 11th through 24th, if you need to see Cats. And let's ask Alice and Toni, what else do you have that you know about coming up?
Well, some of the stuff that I see everything. So I see theater and I see, it's a little later into May, but tickets, in fact, for all I know, Wonderbound's next show might be sold out already. I mean, they had an incredible advance sale the day that the tickets went on sale. They're doing, and it's interesting because they're doing Sam and Delilah. This is a re-envisioning of, Samson and Delilah, and then the opera is doing Samson and Delilah, the opera by Saint-Saëns. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see those two shows back to back. Colorado Ballet is doing in April. They have their one program a year that is contemporary ballet, and it's what we call a mixed bill program. So it's not a full-length ballet, but it's 3 different pieces. And it's always interesting to see any company do classical ballet and then contemporary ballet, where the style is completely different. And I just have to say that today dancers have to do everything. It doesn't matter what their training is, especially ballet companies. They do ballets in bare feet. They do ballets in ballet slippers. They do ballets that are acrobatic. So those are the things that, that I'm really looking forward to in the next few months.
All right, Toni.
I guess I'll just shout one more out. It's a company over in Boulder whom I don't think we've talked about on the podcast yet. It's Viva Theater. It's a production company over there. They're dedicated to producing plays with people who they identify as older in the community. And so they are producing this play called Talking With, and it is going to be over at the Dairy Arts Center. And it is about kind of just the experience of what was it like to be a woman in 1981. And it's told through monologues and all of these women over there. So I think it's going to be a really great production. And if you haven't seen anything from Viva Theater, I definitely recommend getting out there. They do really solid work.
Great. Yeah. A couple others that I meant to touch on. The Making of a Great Moment is at Millabo Art Theater in Colorado Springs. And our new reviewer, Judith, is going to be at that one coming up. And then, Alice, you're going to see Cirque du Soleil. It's at the
Yeah.
ball arena. So you're going to write something about that.
And this is, Cirque on ice.
Oh my!
So I have no idea what it's going to be like. I mean, we all know, I guess, what Cirque, what they do, how extravagant their productions are. So this is going to be something completely different, I presume.
Okay, like the old Ice Capades, remember?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, as a kid in New York growing up, I remember seeing all the ads for Ice Capades all the time.
I used to go every year. They would. I was in Atlantic City. They used to come every single year, and I went every year.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine the Cirque du Soleil version is probably a little more elaborate because, also on the other end of the spectrum is Vintage is doing the Glass Menagerie coming up. So Eric is going to be at that next week. So we'll have a review of that. And I think that's it. I would also just quickly mention that both Curious Theater and the Denver Center Broadway have released their season schedules, and we have those on the site if you want to check that out. There's some cool shows coming up there. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Alice. It was great to have you as a guest, and you can welcome anytime.
It's been great, and great to meet you, Tony. So I really appreciate the chance.
Yeah.
So nice to meet you, Alice. Really enjoyed talking with you today.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Tony, thanks again. And for those of you who know Tony by sight, you may not recognize him. He cut off a lot of his hair, so you might be like, "Who is that guy?" Anyway, all right. Well, we will stand by. We'll have Tony's interview with Deborah Jordy, Executive Director of the SCFD. So hold on.
Good morning, Deborah. How's it going?
Morning. It's great. It's a gorgeous bleak day in Colorado.
Absolutely. I know. I was just saying before the pod, you could have been anywhere in the world today. So I'm so excited that you are here bright and early this morning to talk with me a little bit about your role as the Executive Director of the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. So I guess the first question I'd just like to hear is, could you share a little bit about your journey in the arts and cultural sector leading up to your current role as the executive director of the FCFD, and talk a little bit about how your kind of past experiences shaped your vision and current approach?
Sure. Well, I think all my experience has led me to this job in my career. I started off as an artist many, many years ago, a visual artist, made large-scale ceramic sculpture, lived in LA, had a studio, was an okay artist, but I really realized that I was better at the writing about and thinking about the arts. So then I morphed into, came back to Colorado and worked my way up at the Denver Art Museum as associate curator of modern contemporary art. And so that really helped inform my thinking about the role of arts and culture, whether it's visual or performing arts, in how you think about the creator. That then led me to, as I say, I went to the dark side, started running organizations, and was the ED of the Arvada Center for the Arts and Humanities. And then I ran a foundation in Tier 3 organization in Douglas County. Then I went to the Colorado Business Committee of the Arts, which really helped inform the intersection with arts and business, and then to SCFD. So, and in amongst all that, there was experience with government. I've been very engaged personally in politics, but I think all of this, one of the most important things is that starting off as an artist, it helped inform my thinking that we never lose sight of the role of the individual painter, actor, whatever their discipline.
Yeah. So I guess for some of our audience who may not be 100% familiar with what the SCFD is, maybe they've heard that acronym thrown around, but they don't actually know what it means. Could you explain a little bit about what the SCFD is and its significance within the cultural landscape of Colorado? Sorry for getting a little...
Sure. No, it's a little tongue twister. Took me years to say Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. It's like a theater exercise. You have to practice it 25 times and keep going.
You heard it here first, theater folks. Start working in the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District into your warm-ups.
There you go. Say it 25 times and say it backwards. So however, but it's, so the SCFD, the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, is the second largest cultural taxing district in the United States. We are a tax that distributes and makes grants in the 7-county area. Our geographic footprint is about the size of Delaware and Rhode Island put together. So it's a large footprint. It's from Boulder County to Douglas County, Arapahoe, Jeffco, way up into Nederland to Bennett, kind of a big, big footprint. And we fund culture, and our goal is to we fund arts and culture, and it's culture for all. So it's a lot of money. Last year, all in grants and distributions were a little over $84 million.
Yeah.
So it's important because we fund so many large and small organizations, cultural, performing arts, visual arts, music, science, all across, literary arts, all across the counties.
And can you talk a little bit about the distinction between, you used this term already earlier, the tier 1 versus a tier 2 versus a tier 3 organization?
Sure. The way that it's structured, and it was set up in 1988 and then first passed in 1988 and then first distribution in 1989, we have 3 tiers. So tier 1 comprises the large national, internationally recognized organizations, the Denver Center for Performing Arts, the Denver Zoo, the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, the Denver Art Museum, and who did I forget? The Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Did I say them all?
I think so.
Yeah. Zoo, Art Museum, Nature and Science, DCPA, and oh my gosh, who did I forget? Botanic Gardens, Denver Botanic Gardens. Yeah. That's tier 1. Tier 2 is comprised of 32 organizations. Initially, it started off as 7. So these are the more regional. I say that they're regional, but they also have a national reach and some international reach too, as do all of some of our across the tiers. So it's the ballets, the opera companies, the symphony, the Arvada Center, Lone Tree, in Centennial or Lone Tree Pace. So it's those larger regional centers. And then tier 3 comprises the largest group of organizations that we have about 260 organizations that we fund every year. And they're really important because they're neighborhood or local organizations. So it could be a vintage theater, or it could be a choral group in Lakewood, or so it's more targeted to geographic areas, not always, but sometimes, that are feeling a need and a niche in a particular community. So it's more locally based.
Yeah. Can you, since joining the SCFD in 2016, what achievement are you kind of most proud of, or project that you kind of worked on, gotten a chance to spearhead and be a part of, that you kind of, when you look back, you're kind of really be proud of it as part of being your career?
We weathered the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I think, because we're different we're not a foundation. We're not a public foundation. We're not a private foundation. What we do is set in law that the voters that you all vote on and approve, and thank you for voting and thank you for continuing to think about us. So I'm most proud that we were able to continue year over year from the day we shuttered everything in 20 through recovery and to now, that we've been able to sustain organizations because it's general operating support. So during the pandemic, organizations could responsibly use their funds to turn on the lights, to pay their staff when theaters were shuttered, when no performance, nothing was happening. So really, that to me and it was thanks to all the residents, to you all, for spending money and keeping the economy somewhat going. So I'm most proud of managing and working through the pandemic and really I was really on the ground with organizations, in touch with them, talking to them when we were all trying to navigate this incredibly difficult time.
Yeah. So how does the SCFD kind of ensure an equitable distribution of funds among these diverse range of cultural organizations that you support? Because it's all of the arts and culture, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So how does that process kind of work?
Sure. We try, and I'll say we can do better. Again, because it's in statute, we have, and I don't want to bore you with the details, but there's percentages are set in the statutes, and I won't go into all the details. So the bulk of the money is going to the tier ones, then to tier 2 and tier 3. So, we need to do more. I think one thing that I've really worked on, what our board has worked on, we have a very diverse board. So we have many voices at the table. And for the tier 3 funding, which is locally controlled. So in each of the counties, we have it's called a County Cultural Council. Really, that's a great name for a grant making panel. So these are volunteers in those counties that make the funding decisions about organizations that they live and work with. So those cultural counties, we've had more time to work with them. We just completed a really successful EDIA training. When they're scoring, we have a scoring criteria that really has an equity lens. So we're really looking at how the organizations that are applying are looking at equity across the board. And so we just keep working on it. We ask questions of all of our organizations, what they're doing or in their organizations, staff, board, programming, BIPOC led, all those kinds of things. But we have more work to do on the distribution. And, when we open up, when we go back to the voters, we'll be looking at changes.
Yeah. So I guess I'd like to stay kind of on that same point. So in what ways does kind of the SCFD kind of work towards making the arts and culture accessible to a broader audience across the 7 counties it serves? So if the SCFD wasn't there, what would people kind of lose? So I guess kind of asking that,
Well,
that value.
First off, if SCFD were to go away, we'd have a huge hole, and the landscape of our culturals would be drastically diminished. But to your point, it's because our goal is always to make sure that all people are served and know that this is culture for them, so they have access. So the free days at the tier 1s and some of the tier 2s. Many of our organizations across the board, large and small, offer reduced programming. Some organizations have provided transportation, which we know can be a barrier for residents to get to facilities.
Absolutely.
The organizations all know that they have a responsibility to serve the counties widely, and they all know that they need to really think about how to work with schools on school programming, mostly after school programming. But again, that's just woven through the DNA of SCFT to know, because at the end of the day, this is a tax. It's not a grant. It's a grant, but you and everyone in our community needs to know that they're their institutions and they're a part of making it happen.
Yeah. So you already kind of mentioned this when you were kind of talking about one of your proudest achievements, but with the evolving landscape of arts and cultures, particularly considering the digital advancements and challenges posed by the pandemic, that companies still kind of face those lingering challenges, how is the SCFD adapting its strategies to support organizations and ensure they're able to have that long-term growth and sustainability?
Well, first off, we're really, when the statute was written and passed, there was nothing about virtual. And so everyone jumped on the virtual bandwagon during the pandemic, which was great to give kids access to culture. Swallow Hill Music was doing ukulele lessons for classes, and theater groups were doing performance. It was just great. But I think we've seen a reduction in virtual just because it's hard to monetize, especially when it started off free. So I think we're thinking about, for me, and I hate to keep referring to the pandemic, but it was a game changer. And we've gone from recovery to really stabilization. And a lot of organizations are still in that stabilization mode. Some are into growth. There's not one size fits all. Ticket sales may be up at one theater I'm not going to name theaters because I don't want to misquote. But it may be down in another. So it's just, I'm very interested in organizations really thinking about stabilization, not necessarily growth, because growth isn't always the right answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're not able to hit everything and pay all your current debts, it's maybe not so good to be focusing on growth. You got to focus on sustaining.
Yeah. I will say that generally, I hope, and I think this is borne out to be true, SCFD has allowed organizations to be more innovative, depending on what they are interested in doing, whether it's a curious theater or it's a children's theater piece or it's research that the zoo wants to do in Mongolia or whatever it might be. It's with this stable funding, along with earned revenue, organizations can say, okay, we're going to take a risk and try some things.
I guess my final question for you, Deborah, is what are some of the long-term goals for the SCFD? What are some of those proposed changes that you'd maybe like to take back to the voters? And how do you envision the organization's role in the future of Colorado's cultural scene?
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, I believe we punch way above our weight for a cultural region our size, and in part due to the incredible talent we have, the innovation, the networking that our culturals do locally and nationally and internationally to kind of stay connected. I think that's a really strong strength of us. For the future, I want to make sure that SCFD is voted on and people in the community know the value for them. So again, it's just making sure that we're educating our children, that they know the value of going to a symphony or going to a play or seeing an exhibition and value that as a part of their life. So thinking about next generations, I have a 14-year-old grandson. He'll be voting in the next election, which blows my mind. So how do we in the cultural community, make sure that everyone understands the value? That's a big one. I know it doesn't sound like it, but just building awareness to make sure that we continue to have this rich cultural environment. And then we look at how, and I don't have the answers today, how we make the distribution more equitable, and stay tuned on that one.
Yeah, we will definitely stay tuned for more information. Well, thank you so much, Deborah, for taking some time out of your day to talk a little bit about your role as the executive director of the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. Not at that time. It takes practice, but you get there.
Right. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it.
All right, well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much to Deborah Jordy for joining us to talk about SCFD, and for Alice Kaderlan to come on and join me and Toni to talk about theater criticism and dance and all that stuff. Next week, we'll be back with another interview. Usually, I don't know who it is yet, but we'll find somebody, scare somebody up to talk to you about performance or theater. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the OnStage Colorado podcast, wherever you get your audio stuff, and please give us a review or a couple of stars if you're enjoying this, and let other theater lovers in your life know about us. It takes a while for a podcast to gain ground, but those who have been listening to us really seem to like it and are surprised that that we're out here doing this every week. So also be sure to check out all the reviews, news, other podcast episodes, and our full statewide theater calendar on the website at onstagecolorado.com. All right, I'm Alex Miller.
I'm Toni Tresca.
And for the first time, I'm Alice Kaderlan.
All right, and we'll see you at the show.